everyone. Good afternoon, good day, good times. Thank you for joining us as we do our second podcast involving our emotional and social strengths. So today we're going to discuss leveraging your emotional social intelligence for growth, focusing on the self-perception composite. Last month, we provided a high-level overview of the EQI 2.0 and how we apply it to developing a path of evolution for individuals and groups. This week, we are going to focus on the self-perception composite. We're going to dive deeper into self-perception after we do a quick round of introductions of myself and the presenters. So I'll start off. My name is Tyson Werner, and I provide the EQI 2.0 assessment to early careers and senior executives to identify their strengths and areas of development for personal and professional growth, and how to create a harmonious environment with direct reports, peers, and senior leadership. I own Evolutionary Talent and partner with Catherine Fasanella, who owns My Higher Roads for those starting their career or making a transition. That's a little bit about myself and how I use the EQI. Cinzia, let's hear about you and how you use the EQI.
Thank you, Tyson, and welcome everybody. I'm Cinzia. I'm from Italy. I'm based in Italy, and I am a global leader in a multinational company where I have a dual role. On one side, I work on culture and employee engagement, and on the other side, on leadership development and coaching. I create growth programs, and I do coach a lot. I see some familiar faces here in the audience with other coaches. I use EQ a lot with clients when it comes to understanding a little bit more about their emotional side, so to say. So that's a little bit about me, and super happy to be here with you. Kathysue, you want to share something about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much. As Cinzia said, I'm Kathysue, and I work as a trauma healing facilitator and researcher in the positive mental health field. I take an integrative treatment and trauma-informed approach when helping clients with complex PTSD and use the EQI as a clinical assessment pre-treatment to get a baseline score in their emotional social intelligence, and then again mid and post-treatment, which allows me to help my clients grow, balance, and then rebalance as needed, and then to sustain their overall EQ. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tyson to begin our discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathysue, and thank you, Cinzia. So again, thank you, audience, for joining us today. And if you have any questions, we invite you to please raise your hand, as we would love for this to be an interactive podcast. Also, remember, you can message any of us directly here on LinkedIn. With that being said, I want to remind everybody that there are 5 major composite groups when it comes to the EQI 2.0, which are 1, self-perception, 2, self-expression, 3, interpersonal, 4, decision-making, and 5, stress management. Each one of those composites consists of 3 subscales. And so for today, we focus on self-perception. And I'm going to give you the 3 subscales with the definition so that we're all on the same page. The first under self-perception is self-regard, which is respecting yourself while understanding and accepting your strengths and weaknesses. Your self-regard is often associated with feelings of inner strength and self-confidence. Number 2 is self-actualization. It is the willingness to persistently improve oneself and engage in the pursuit of personally relevant and meaningfully objectives that lead to a rich and enjoyable life. Number 3 is emotional self-awareness, which is recognizing and understanding one's own emotions. This includes being able to understand subtleties in one's own emotions while understanding the cause and impact they have on our judgment. And I'm taking a quick look. I see that we don't have any questions so far. Again, I invite you to ask questions if you have any. And with that, I'm going to kick off by asking Kathysue, our first question, which is, can you give me a little bit more information and some actionable steps a person can use when focusing on self-regard?
Sure. Thanks, Tyson. And as Tyson mentioned, self-regard is about respecting yourself and understanding not only your strengths, but also your weaknesses or limitations. And more importantly, to accept any limitations you may have. So self-regard can be described as inner strength, self-confidence, or self-esteem. In reference to how self-regard fits into a person's overall self-perception, means that a person knows how to position a strength or limitation in different situations, socially, professionally, or personally. Many of my trauma clients lack self-confidence, which can show in their body mechanics and even the tone of their voice. A person may often speak lower or even more aggressively to overcompensate for their lack of confidence. The EQI scores each of the subscales within the EQ with a normed score that usually falls between 90 and 110. So if you're well less than 90, you may experience self-doubt and be overly self-critical. You might say things like, oh, I could never do that. I'm not smart enough. I'm just so stupid. So your overall sense of self-perception becomes unbalanced. Strategies to increase your self-regard include saying positive affirmations out loud, rediscovering your self-belief system based on your values, or creating a list of things you like about yourself or maybe want to improve upon. Conversely, if you are well above 110 and you're unbalanced in several of the supportive subscales like interpersonal relationships and empathy, you might be perceived as arrogant, vain, conceited, narcissistic, or overly confident. So a strategy to balance self-regard out would be to maybe volunteer in the community or offer servant leadership services to a marginalized population to increase your sense of empathy. Ultimately, you want to make good choices in relation to who you are and what you need for yourself. I always tell my clients that it's not about what you want, but rather about what you need in relation to who you are. And self-regard is a huge part of this. Also, oftentimes with my trauma clients, their self-regard is linked to their sense of hope and optimism. And when self-regard is low, there's a sense of despair. But as their self-regard increases, so does their sense of hope, self-awareness, vision for their future, and level of happiness. Which brings us to our next subscale of self-actualization that Cinzia will now discuss.
Thank you, Kathysue. I really like the fact that you touched upon a few of the things that I'm going to cover in self-actualization, and this gives really the idea of the fact that all these subskills and strengths that we are looking at are very much connected to one another and cannot be considered in silos when discussing the emotional and social intelligence of a person. So self-actualization basically is the willingness to pursue your goals, to go for your dreams, to achieve and to try to reach your objectives and have a fulfilled life. This is very important for us because in general, people, if there is a balance between what we want to achieve and what we're doing to achieve that, our well-being, which is one of the other indicators that we have from EQI 2.0, is certainly in balance. But putting things in perspective and considering also what Kathysue said about self-regard, I'll give a practical example. Self-actualization, let's say that I set my goals extremely high, and I personally, for example, I set the bar very high for myself. It's important to maintain a balance with, for example, the ability to understand the circumstances, so what we call reality testing, and this is something we will discover in the upcoming podcast if you want to follow us for the future. Because if we set goals that are too high, the risk is that if we don't achieve them, then our self-regard can go down because we think, okay, we are not good enough, we are not smart enough, exactly what Kathysue said. So this is the first important thing that I wanted to mention. The second important thing about self-actualization is, and this is very much connected to my passion of working in a multicultural global environment, is the fact that I've noticed that in different cultures, the self-actualization element is considered differently. So typically in cultures where there is a huge focus on individuals and your own pursuit of personal goals, like for example the US or some European countries like Germany, Australia, these type of cultures, the focus on you as a person, expressing emotion, reaching your life purpose, and the focus is all on you. On the other side, we have cultures that are more focused on the collective aspect. For example, some Asian cultures. Let me take the example of China. And when I think Asian culture, let's not consider all of them, because then we have Japan that instead is very much similar to more individualistic cultures. So in collective cultures, people tend to think about the well-being of the community first rather of the individual. So the bottom line for me is when I do debrief and I have coaching sessions involving also EQ 2.0 assessment, I like to think more holistically of the person for the person and think about their own culture in the country, their own family culture, maybe the company culture they work in. There are huge, big national, multinational companies. Let's mention Google, Microsoft. They have their own strong internal culture, which is also mm, possibly shaping your own behavior. So I think this is another interesting element connected to understanding EQ in a global environment. And today, more and more, we are in a global environment. And the third subskill that we're going to review with Tyson is the self-awareness, which is another interesting one. So I wanted to hand over to Tyson, but before that, I just want to remind the audience that if you want to ask a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and we are happy to take it. So I don't see any question. I don't know, Tyson, if you see them being the moderator. Otherwise, you over to you for self-awareness.
Perfect, thank you. No, I don't see any hands raised, and excellent information and examples, Cinzia and Kathysue. And I know that you could take it further in depth, as this is a pretty conclusive and incorporative discussion around self-perception, and we touch a little bit on how it's not siloed, but it does reflect into the other subcategories as well. With self-awareness, we discussed how it's about recognizing and understanding one's own emotions and how those affect our judgment and our communication. And for me, when I focus on that with leaders and I focus on it with new careerists and executive careerists, a lot of the time we're focusing on negative emotions and not so much the positive emotions. But if we do this thing where we remove our emotional state from all judgment and decisions, because that's what we hear is the best way to make a decision, is to remove all emotions from the equation to make an objective choice, it can have a negative view on an individual. So like Kathysue mentioned earlier, there are ranges to how we can express these emotions and lean on these skills that we have through development to be more comfortable with utilizing them. So if we were to completely remove our emotional self-awareness and it was on the low end, we would be ignoring our own emotional needs and our own motivations. And we would be surprised by those reactions that other people give us. And if we were on the high end of that spectrum, if we went to the complete opposite side and we did nothing but enrage and enlist in our emotional self-awareness, we could be seen as self-consumed or seeing things unrelated to anyone else, just ourselves. Also called self-centered and self-indulgent, or extremely hypersensitive to emotional variances within the workplace. So when we take that and we break it down just a little bit, we want to focus on, well, how do we manage these emotional states? If I can understand emotional self-awareness, or even if I can't understand emotional self-awareness, what are some steps that I can actually do to become better at this? And one would be to look at other individuals, watch their emotional states, Start to recognize how their facial expressions come across when they're communicating with you. Take some notes. It'll help you recognize their facial expressions as well as your facial expressions that you will give off to those that you communicate with. A second is to monitor, like Cinzia said, the volume, the tone, the speech, the rate of pattern, and what does that seem like in a conversation, whether it's meeting a deadline or dealing with a frustrated individual in your work setting. And recognize that speech pattern so you understand when you may become curt with your language, sharp with your words, short with your listening capabilities, so then you can work on this interpersonal relationship. The third one then is to look at those emotions that you obtain from watching other individuals and then pay attention to yourself. Really look at yourself and say, this is how I react when I'm upset. And learn about why did you react this way. Really delve into what surrounded my emotional transition. And a key to remember is emotions are our own. So we never want to give our power away to another individual when they say something that we don't necessarily understand or like, or something that elates us and makes us super excited. If you lean on positivity and affirmations, you will crumble under criticism. You have to be able to maintain your own personal strength through your emotional self-awareness and your self-perception composite. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cinzia, because I see that we do not have any questions at this time, but if you do, please raise your hand and we will be happy to take them.
Yeah, I don't see any question. Actually, Kathysue, I think you have something you were curious about, my combination of self-regard and self-actualization, right?
Yes, I wanted to know, you had mentioned in a previous conversation how you felt that there was a sense of weakness within your self-regard, and it was something you might want to share with the group today.
Yeah, I think it's more than a weakness, is I would say an awareness of the importance for me to balance my self-actualization with my self-regard. And this is going back to what I said before. I really like to set the bar high for myself. I love learning. I love exploring new things. I love listening to others who share knowledge, and I always try to do my best. But clearly, I also need to be realistic and be conscious of the fact that certain circumstances are out of my control, and not everything depends on me. And consequently, I am working to make sure my ability to understand reality as it is, so the reality testing that we will see in the future, because it's a part of another subscale, another group of skills. I want to make sure that I work on my ability to balance optimism, reality testing with my my goals, and make sure I reach what I want. And I'm a dreamer. Let's be honest, I'm a dreamer. I dream big, and I have to learn to make sure I am also grounded, so that my self regard remains in balance. Doesn't mean it's a weakness. And I would say, as it's important to consider the balance again, because a number or a scale as it is in silos doesn't mean anything. It's how it works with others, right? You can also balance and use and increase one skill and one subskill in a particular situation. And this is something I mentioned in our first podcast, for example. My ability and problem solving capability is also very high. This is absolutely something that works well in my work environment in a company. But when I coach people, problem solving is a competence and a skill you don't want to use. You're not solving problems. So I've learned how to use this particular skill in different contexts. Thank you, Kathysue, for picking up on this point that I made. But I wanted to just remind the audience, if you have questions, don't feel shy. It's just a few of us. And we have a question, actually, a hand raised by Lucky. Do we want to go with that before handing over to you, Tyson?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually have another question in the chat as well, which we can pose after we listen to Lucky's question. So I'm going to bring you off mute and allow you to ask your question. Hello.
Good afternoon or good evening. I'm Lucky from Bloemfontein in South Africa. So actually, I'm from the technical background, and I used to believe that no matter how I feel, but an event is an event, or a situation is a situation. So my question is, how can I positively deal with that without necessarily suppressing my feelings or my emotions? Thank you.
Great question, Lucky, and thank you for asking. Do we have Cinzia or Kathysue? Would you like to take the question?
I can maybe start, and then I hand over to Kathysue to more comments. But my big suggestion is events happen because life happens. And so every time we face a change or something that is disrupting us, that is not in what we were expecting, it's not the change itself that is going to impact us, but the way we react to the change. And so we have the choice. We are a choice. We can choose how to react. We can choose how to approach what happened to us. And that's the biggest way we are impacted by events in our life. And so you can choose to react with, taking into account your emotional awareness and emotional expression. You can then move to a more rational approach. It really depends also on your personality. Some people immediately rationalize things. Some others need to dive deeper in their emotional state and come out the other way, with more strength. So there is no one size fits all, I would say. Kathysue, I don't know if you have something else to share.
Well, I would agree with all of what you said, and it's really tough not to react. It's hard for everybody, and I find that it really depends on the situation and the people or the person involved in the situation. But it's really good to learn how to practice mindfulness or to set a pause on yourself, and it can be done in many different ways. Some of my clients like visuals to do a pause. Even when my children were younger, I would put my hand up and they knew, okay, that's enough, no more engaging. But you have to share those types of visual cues, so to speak, with your family members or people that you work with. But if you can remember not to react and to just give yourself a pause, whether it's taking a walk outside, removing yourself from the situation, meditating, listening to some quiet or calming music, sleeping on it. I think I might have mentioned that just a second ago. But that sort of thing. The hardest part is to remember, is to be mindful that, I'm just going to take a pause and sit on this for a minute in order to gain some clarity. Tyson, do you have anything to add, or?
Yes, you guys did extremely well. And for the sake of time, because I know that we have two more questions, it looks like Thomas has his hand up, and I want to answer this one from Johnny, would be, remember, kind of a combination of what Cinzia and Kathysue said, is break down that event into the situation, the people, and what caused it. Use your emotional self-awareness to understand what happened during that event to cause the trigger to you. Mm-hmm. If it's not necessarily the event, like Cinzia said, is it the people, like Kathysue said, or is it the conversational tone around it? Once you get there, you can focus on the content. What was it? Then you can look at the pattern. Is it something that's happening frequently and often? Is that what's causing the emotion? And it's just today the straw broke the camel's back. And then look at that relationship. How is their attitude, their effects, their conversation affecting you personally and your look towards that individual? Because if they start eroding what was initially a positive relationship, now when you see them, you come into it with a negative viewpoint and you look at them and automatically are like, oh no, here comes Joe again. What do we got going on? So you want to make sure that you can focus on that relationship and those independent factors. To turn over quickly to Johnny's question before I answer from the audience from Thomas and Kyla, Johnny had asked which factors influence positively and negatively on the EQ, and can someone regress in their EQ due to external experiences?
I can answer that a little bit. In regards to the regressing, it happens. I won't say it happens all the time, but I will say that it's a common occurrence with the trauma survivors that I work with. Anything can happen to set you back, so to speak. So that's why it's so important to learn how to grow your EQ and how to rebalance, because life just knocks you for a flip here or there or whatever, and you got to kind of get back. So as you regress, it's like you got to fight your way back. So there's always, you always want to be able to get to a certain level and sustain yourself, but that's the hard part. The hardest part is sustaining, because things will happen, situations will happen and come into your life that are going to knock you off or knock you for a flip, and you have to be able to come back and rally yourself back. So I think just so someone else can maybe touch upon that, maybe the first part of that question, I'll just leave it at that. But yes, it does happen, and learning the skills in order to grow your EQ will be used over and over and over again.
Tyson, can I make an additional comment? It will be very quick, maybe, on
Yes,
this one.
absolutely.
I just wanna make sure that it's clear that EQ, if you take the assessment today, and maybe if you took it 2 years ago, and you'll take it in 2 years, EQ is a snapshot in time, and it can be influenced by a variety of factors. The good news is that you can change your EQ, unlike IQ. And the other thing that I wanted to go back to the previous question is, all reactions, all feelings, all emotional states are valid, and the importance is becoming self-aware and learning what to use when in terms of emotional skills. So we have more questions.
Perfect.
Tyson.
Yes, and I'm going to turn it over to Thomas because I saw that he had his hand raised first, and he can go ahead with his question, and then Tyler, we will go to you.
Yeah, hi Tyson, and thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. My question is difficult, and I don't expect an expert answer, but I'm happy to ask it. So I'm a 59-year-old father of a 17-year-old person, male, and I think I'm, through years of wisdom, have fairly high EQ and self-awareness. However, I have a 17-year-old who, like a lot of 17-year-olds around the world, jump at the handle and want immediate results, use their phone, send a lot of messages. They want it now. They get angry if they don't get it. If you were me, how would you deal with that situation when someone is constantly, demanding and swearing and going off the handle at the easiest and earliest opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. That's an excellent question. And now, without being a trained psychologist or a medical doctor, I would never give you advice as far as this is clinically proven to be the best decision. But what I can say relating to the emotional social intelligence model, the EQI, there is a section in there under decision making. And that composite specifically focuses on what's called impulse control. And that's the ability to resist or delay an impulse or a drive or temptation to act that involves avoiding rash behaviors and decision making. So with that one, I would say that you would take the assessment, we would see where you score. From that score, then we would create an action plan. From that action plan, we would then monitor and work on improvements over time to help maintain that impulse. And it's not something that's done rapiditiously. It's not something that's done simplistically. It is something that takes time, but there are actionable strategies and steps that you can utilize in order to progressively improve through your emotional awareness. With that being said, I know that we're at the top of the hour. And again, Thomas, if you want to take this conversation deeper, we definitely can. You can reach out to Kathysue, Cinzia, or myself here on LinkedIn, and we'd love to take that question, or we can bring it to the next podcast presentation that we have.
So just a quick one follow-up. So you're saying that I do it or the 17-year-old does it?
The 17-year-old will need to do it. You could do it as well. You could validate, your feelings of being 59 and having vilified your emotional intelligence and self-awareness. That is excellent. The 17-year-old will probably benefit the most. Not only does it have to do with those relationships from parental to children, that age change of, having your own independence versus still listening to a parent, but it would give them an objective view to the EQI assessment of how they score, which is a standardized and normed assessment. So it's been proven over and over through study groups to validate the scores and then actually set some actionable steps to move forward. And I'm going to jump to Kyla for the last question. And I want to remind everybody we will be back next month. And thank you, Thomas.
Kyla, I think you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you gave me this opportunity. I want to ask you a question, and it is how to learn problem solving, and is it that important in our life? And that's my question. Thank you.
That's a very good question. Can I take it, Tyson?
Yes.
It depends. I mean, problem solving, it depends on many factors. And if we are looking at the professional life, or if we are looking at the personal life, problem solving should be in balance with many other sub skills that are part of EQ. So I give the example for myself right before in 10 minutes ago. Problem solving is something that is extremely helpful for my work in terms of managing projects, respecting deadlines that work, facing issues and finding solutions quickly. So in an organizational environment, it's extremely helpful. But when it comes to dealing with emotions of a person or doing coaching, so coaching others, you do not solve the problems of others because you start from the assumption that others have all the resources they need to find their own solutions. You just support them. So your question can have multiple answers because it depends on the area you're working on. For yourself, the problems you're trying to solve, are you trying to really solve problems, or are you trying to provide just support for others? So if you're interested in a more specific question, maybe we might need a little bit more background, so you can reach out offline to any of us. I don't know if Kathysue and Tyson, you have more insights.
I'd love to jump in. I actually have a degree in creative problem solving, and one of the hats that I hold is creative teaching people how to creatively problem solve. So to answer your question, is it important? It's extremely important. It's actually changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. in year of 2009, and I've never looked back since. It's the reason I wake up every day happy. It's the reason I have energy every day and that I never want to retire. So it's the difference between thinking of yourself as a procrastinator and then all of a sudden having the tools and the strategies on the how to get from A to Z or C or D or wherever you have to go. And in our podcast, in the comments section, I can certainly I'll add a link to some free creative problem solving exercises and all kinds of videos, which I think you'll find fascinating and very interesting. And I'll just leave it at that because we are running over.
Excellent conversation, and thank you, audience, for all your questions. It's interactive, and that is absolutely what we love. I see that Leo had the same reactions, and a few other people too as well. So we will have the podcast again. We will come back to it next month when we have our next meeting in Guar. Do not worry, I will get to your question here in a second. Next month's podcast, we will focus on self-expression. So look out for the link and the invite here on LinkedIn. And remember that emotional social intelligence is just a snapshot. It's a marker, like Cinzia said earlier, we can use for continuous growth and development, which Kathysue has mentioned numerous times on how we can focus and improve ourselves. And it is always key to balance our EQ, and none of these are meant to be siloed. So I'm going to take the last question from Guav before we close out this podcast today. And again, thank you everybody for joining. So Guav, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening, Tyson, Kathy, Cinzia. How are you people?
Great, thank you.
So I wanted to thank you from the core of my heart, for the insightful session that you people have done it. I have jotted down few points, few notes that has been taken care of, and definitely I'll implement it in my leadership coach fund. That will help me out in being the best version of myself. So thanks a lot for coming up and giving a so insightful session, basically.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. It's great to see that, what we are sharing, the passion we have is something you can take, some inspiration from.
Yes. And with that being said, unless Kathysue or Cinzia have anything else to say to the audience,
Apart from see you next time.
I just want to thank everybody for coming on and joining us today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next podcast.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.